I'm now going to continue my video series on Henry Ward Beecher and his sermons by discussing Luke chapter 7, verse 47. This is where Jesus gets invited to dinner. Now, for those of you who are watching this video right now, I have a thought for you to ponder. Let's say that Jesus is walking down the street. You walk up to him, you strike up a conversation with him. Would you be so quick, without a moment's hesitation, to invite Jesus to your house for dinner? Let's think about this very carefully. We're talking about Jesus, the Son of God. We're talking about an omnipotent, omniscient being. Someone that knows everything that you've ever done from the day you were born until now. And you're saying to me that without a moment's hesitation, without a moment's thought, you would invite Jesus to your house for dinner. Think carefully. Now, if you want to give the answer down here in the comments below, be brave enough and go ahead. This is just something for you to think about. Would I invite Jesus to my house for dinner? Yes, I would. Even though it would probably bring up some interesting conversation, I still would do it anyway. Because that's how much I care about Jesus. Okay, so I have no problem inviting him to dinner. I do know he would probably bring up some interesting conversation. We would probably be going at it for a couple hours. But, yeah, still, it would be okay. All right, now, who is inviting Jesus to dinner in this particular story? Well, it's a Pharisee. What? Pharisee? Oh yes, these are the Pharisees, and of course you had these three sects, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, and the Essenes, and they all three had a different interpretation of the Torah, and Jesus considered all their interpretations wrong. Yeah, this is the kind of Pharisee that is actually inviting Jesus to his house for dinner. Of course, you know something interesting is going to happen when this happens. And it did. While they're having dinner, there's this lady that comes in. And she is an obvious sinner. Everybody knows she's a sinner. Okay? She is a poor sinner. She is not rich at all. She's poor. And she's a sinner. Okay. Now, they don't exactly tell us exactly what kind of sins she's committed, but she is a very sinful person. So what does she do? She walks up, I wouldn't exactly say behind Jesus, but the way Jesus was reclining, she walks up directly to his feet and grabs them. And then she starts crying, and the tears fall on his feet, and she wipes away the tears with her hair. And then she breaks open a perfume bottle and dumps that on his feet. Now here's the Pharisee. He's thinking to himself, well, you know what? I don't have much of a problem here. After all, I'm not a sinful person. Hey, I worship only God. I have no idols in my house. I have kept the Sabbath day. And I haven't killed anybody. At least no way that anybody knows anyway. And certainly my parents are right here beside me, and they're all well and taken care of. So I haven't neglected them. And don't you ever think I committed adultery or I stole from anybody. Sometimes I may have borrowed indefinitely, but I never really stole. That's how they thought. And I would never bear false witness on my neighbors. Would never do that. And while this Pharisee is thinking all these things, Jesus is like, didn't we forget one of these little commandments called coveting? Well, I would never go and covet anything. Well, you wouldn't tell anybody you coveted anything. That doesn't mean you didn't. Coveting is always the one that trips people up the most. You can live the entire lifestyle of worshiping only God, keeping the Sabbath day, having no idols, never killing, well, murdering as the case may be, never murdering, never stealing, never committing adultery, and making sure your parents are perfectly okay. And yet you can still get tripped up by coveting. That's the one that can really trip you up more often than anything else. Just because you don't do something doesn't mean you don't want to do it. That's the difference. See what I mean? So that's what Jesus is thinking about this point. Now then. Alright, so the Pharisee is becoming indignant to this sinful lady. How dare she even touch your feet? I mean, you know, for a young lady to do this, being a sinner and being a poor sinner, that was a serious offense. Sometimes it was serious offense enough to be put in jail, or possibly even be executed. You just didn't do that to somebody like Jesus. You certainly didn't do that to a Pharisee. So the Pharisee's now outraged at this lady for doing what she just did to Jesus. See what I mean? Jesus is like, how can we turn this into an object lesson? And so Jesus did. And he was like, okay, Mr. Pharisee, this is Jesus talking. Jesus is like, Mr. Pharisee, all right, let's say we have two guys. One's in debt to this master for like $50, and another one's in debt to him for like $5 million. Now, the master forgives both of these people of their debt. Now, who is the more grateful to the master? The guy that owed $50 or the guy that owed $5 million? Well, the Pharisee's like, well, the guy that owed $5 million, he would be eternally grateful to the master for forgiving him for that much. And so Jesus said, okay, since you've said this, who is going to love God more for forgiving sins? Somebody that's committed just a few sins, or somebody who's committed lots of sins? Who is going to be more grateful to God for forgiving that many sins? Well, obviously the person that's committed a great many of sins. And so at that point, Jesus forgave the sinful lady of all of her sins. Just like that. Object lesson taught. Now, all right. The Pharisee was outwardly obeying the Ten Commandments, but inside he was not obeying them at all. Jesus already knew this. Okay? Now the thing is that God and Jesus will not forgive you more when you continue to sin. Oh, well, if I sin more, God and Jesus will forgive me more. Doesn't work that way. As a matter of fact, it's quite the opposite. When you love God and Jesus so much, you're supposed to reject sin, not fall into more of it. See what I mean? Now, the thing is, and I'm sorry for stuttering here, but the thing is, just because you feel that you haven't committed as many sins as somebody else, it should not diminish your love for God. Your love for God should be as great as anybody who's sinned a ton. Because remember, just because you don't think you've sinned that much doesn't mean that God thinks that. God will probably, if you give him a chance, he'll probably show you just how much you've really sinned. He'll nail you for every coveting act you've ever broke. Okay? If you've broken the law of coveting, okay, if you have broken the law of coveting, God will nail you for it. And I guarantee you probably break this law more than any other in your life. Just because you don't do a crime doesn't mean you don't think about it. And the very second you do, God's got you. That's why he put that as commandment number 10. See what I mean? Now then, another thing to remember is that when sinners become Christian, they often will become meek too. Well, I really don't want to talk about God. I know he forgave me and all, but I really don't want to talk about him. God doesn't want meek Christians. Okay? Because remember, if you won't testify to your faith in Jesus to men, Jesus will not testify to his Father about you. That's what Jesus said. Don't believe me? You can look it up in the Bible for yourself. Alright? Now, some people are like, well, people will just see my new sinless life, which really isn't all that sinless. You'll find that out. But, they'll see my new sinless life, and they'll just follow Jesus just because I'm living an example of Jesus. Well, it's nice that you're living an example of Jesus, but if you don't follow that up with verbal testimony, it doesn't count with God. It really doesn't. You have to say, I am a Christian and this is the reason why I live the lifestyle I live. I live like this because I love God. Now, it doesn't mean you have to become a street preacher. That is not what we're talking about here. We're talking about when somebody comes to you and says, hey, why do you live the way you live? You don't hesitate to say, the reason I live the way I live is because I love my God. That's what was being said. Don't make excuses. Just simply say, I love God and that's why I live this way. Don't hesitate to answer like that. Like I say, you don't have to throw it down people's throats. But on the other hand, if somebody asks you directly, point blank, why do you live like this? You say, I am living a God-loving life. That's what you do. Don't be meek, don't be meager. Flat out declare, I love God and I love Jesus, and this is the reason why I live the life I do. And if you want a life similar to my own, then you start loving Jesus. Get the picture? Do not be ashamed of being a Christian. Ever. That doesn't mean you have to go out there and make a public spectacle of yourself. But on the other hand, don't be ashamed of your Christianity. Do you think people that practice paganism are ashamed of their theology? Absolutely not. Well, if they're not ashamed, why are you? You know one of the biggest things about Christians? They never carry their Bibles around. They don't wear crucifixes on their lapels or stars of David. Why not? Jesus would love that. See what I mean? Okay. Hopefully you understood what I was trying to tell you. You can be, I wouldn't say proud. That's a little much. You can be enthusiastic about living a God-loving life without making a public spectacle of yourself. So there's that fine balance between saying, hey, if you're going to ask me, I'm going to tell you the truth. Come right out and say it. They say, well, why do you live this life? I live it because I live a God-loving life. There's your answer. The end. But you don't have to go out in the middle of the street and say, hey, look at me. I live this God-loving life. You don't have to do that. There's a difference between not being ashamed of your faith and making a public spectacle of your faith. See the difference? It's not meek to just quietly walk down the street. What is meek is when somebody comes to you and says, hey, why do you live the way you live? And you sit there, well, don't go on. Say, look, I live a God-loving life, and that's why I walk the way I walk. See what I mean? All right. If you have any comments or questions, you can leave them down here below. I will tell you more in a future video. Stay tuned.